Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking your Friday evening to spend a little bit of time to learn about some history and archaeology and things like that. So I want to thank everyone for coming to the Indiana Landmark Center, one of my favorite buildings in the city. My name is Jeannie Regan-Dinius, and I am the Director of Historic Preservation for Crown Hill Foundation at the Crown Hill Cemetery, the largest cemetery here in Indiana. Before we get started on tonight's program, I just have a few housekeeping things to get through. First off, this program could not be possible without some of our sponsors. And so first I want to thank Indiana Humanities. Their grant in cooperation with the National Endowment for the Humanities made this program possible. I want to thank Indiana Landmarks, who's allowing us to use this building tonight and making the Zoom webinar available, and so without them, that could not be possible. And then also the city of Indianapolis, who's been a wonderful sponsor and program coordinator with this for this program. And then to the Indiana State University and Dr. Alex Badillo. Dr. Badillo told me, I'm going to bring these people to Terre Haute. It's going to be amazing. And I said, hey, can I latch on and do a program the next night? So thank you for letting me steal your panelists, and thank you panelists for being willing to stay an extra night in the city and doing this program again tonight. So without all of these people, this would not be possible. So how it's going to work tonight is the panelists will do their presentations, and then at the end we'll have time for Q&A. I'm told that it went a little long last night, which is fine. So if you need, because we want all your questions answered. So the program had set originally till about 7:30, but if we go a little later, okay. If you need to leave, okay. But I think everyone is going to want to hear everything that's been said and ask their questions. And so now the question is why Crown Hill Cemetery and the city of Indianapolis would want to hear from Tulsa, Oklahoma. For me personally, anytime that we can talk about history, the reclaiming of individuals' stories, it's a win. If we're going to use scientific methods like archaeology and bioarchaeology, an additional benefit. But Crown Hill is deeply committed to understanding histories of those buried in our cemetery, and we hope to better understand this opportunity by learning about the Tulsa Project. For the city of Indianapolis, I hope we can take lessons from Tulsa, the interaction of their community advisory committee, understanding why interpretation matters, how representation matters even more, and the responsibility of the city, not just the government, but the people of a city, to recognize our history and what we've done to each other, work to acknowledge it, and do better. I hope the city officials can take these lessons and apply it to the Greenlawn Cemetery project to do better research, recovery, and interpret our city's history. So let's get to learning those lessons. To moderate the panel, I'd like to welcome Dr. Alex Badillo, professor at Indiana State University and now archaeologist for Stantec. Alex?
Again, welcome everyone, and thank you for being here. We're honored to have not one, but 3 visitors with us today to talk with us about the ongoing investigation to locate and identify some of the victims of the tragic events of the Tulsa Race Massacre in 1921. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Alex Elvis Badillo. I'm an archaeologist from Indiana State University and Stantec, and I'll be the moderator type for this panel. That means I'll just kind of run the Q&A afterwards. And I want to remind everybody that as we do that, and people come around with a microphone, wait for the microphone to get to you before asking your question. That way everybody can hear the question. So I'll remind you again later on. Yeah, I share a special connection with our panelists today because I have the honor of working with them on their investigative team since 2021. And I share this honor with other people who are here in the room, and I'd like them to stand for just a moment. Thank you. Those are our colleagues and people that are here who are part of that team and work with these guys. I want to first begin tonight by briefly introducing our guests, and I mean brief because I want to give them more time to talk. First, we want to welcome Brenda Nails Alford, who's a descendant of survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre and Black Wall Street entrepreneurs. Their names are James Nails Sr. and Vasanora Nails Green. Ms. Nails Alford was raised in Tulsa and attended the University of Tulsa, where her aunt, Dr. Cecilia Nails Palmer, also a survivor, was the first Black faculty member there. Since the beginning of the Tulsa Race Massacre investigation, she has served in leadership and volunteer roles. She's a former chair of one of the most active members of the Public Oversight Committee, which is a committee comprised of public officials, community leaders, and also descendants of the victims of the massacre. Additionally, she's one of the founding board members of Greenwood Rising Museum in Tulsa. And she's also served in the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission. Next, we want to welcome Dr. Phoebe Stubblefield, who is a forensic anthropologist and the director of the C.A. Pound Human Identification Lab. This is located at the University of Florida. Dr. Stubblefield has been a part of the investigation into the events of the 1921 massacre since the late 90s, when she served first as a scientific consultant for the Tulsa Race Riot Commission. She now serves as a lead forensic anthropologist for the current investigation. Dr. Stubblefield is also a descendant of survivors of the massacre. And finally, we want to welcome Carrie Stackelback, who is the state archaeologist of Oklahoma, a position which is housed in the Oklahoma Archaeological Survey at the University of Oklahoma. Dr. Stackelback has decades of experience in archaeology, ranging a wide range of topics. She's worked in the Southeast and Midwest regions of the U.S. and also abroad in Peru and Oman. And since 2019, Dr. Stackelback has served as the lead archaeologist on the investigation to locate the graves of the victims of the massacre. There is so much more that I can say about these great people here. But like I said, I want to save a little bit of time, but I just want to say that these three comprise the heart of the investigation that is trying to bring light to such a dark time. So in terms of the structure of the panel tonight, Dr. Stubblefield is actually going to begin with us, giving us a bit of context and overview of the events in 1921, and after which each of them are going to speak a little bit about their own roles on the team and their perspectives, and then we'll open up to you all to have questions for them. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass the mic over to Dr. Stubblefield.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All righty. Thank you all for coming out today. I do these presentations sometimes in a timely fashion, and the importance of presenting this information has not grown stale for me, because every audience, all of you out there, and if there's a digital audience, you are helping to reconstruct the history of Greenwood. It was a suppressed history. I'll only touch on that a little bit tonight, but it was a suppressed history. So my role right now is to tell you a little history of the Tulsa Race Massacre, Tulsa Race Riot, Tulsa Disaster, and, point you to some resources. So I will try and stay on track. You saw me get up here with notes, but since I don't read them, things can happen. So Tulsa was the incorporated part of this story, but Greenwood was an unincorporated area north of Tulsa. There was the Frisco Railroad tracks were the boundary, and I liken it to a college town for those of us who are in the post-segregation era, or if you grew up in California like I did, where you don't have a concept of the black side of town. So as an unincorporated area in the 1920s, even before this, but the time that we're interested in, the 1920s, the economy is important for our story. So Tulsa, and other places, not just Tulsa, but Tulsa, and I learned this from reading the newspapers, not from, any other source really, just incidental newspaper reading. Tulsa was part of this culture where if you were white, maybe even if you were black, technically, but definitely if you were white and you needed a servant on any level, and keeping in mind, I'm not talking about a Christian servant. I just mean, cook, housekeeper, laundress, chauffeur, doorman. If you needed a servant, then they had to be black. And I know this from reading this. This is a non sequitur. I'm already going bad. But I was reading randomly a snippet from a newspaper in Veneta, and it's from maybe a little earlier, like the teens, 19 teens. And it's a little ad, and they were talking about how proud they were because they were raising their teenage boys and girls to be useful and skilled. They didn't need any black people there. And I was like, huh? Oh, I mean, of course, that's what you train teenagers to do. What do you mean? So I did not know that they were speaking towards a culture of need. And so, in that context, Greenwood had money flowing in, one direction and circulating around. Because why would you, as a black person, take your well-earned wages and then go into Tulsa and be abused? Perhaps. I don't have time to talk about it because it wasn't all abuse, but there's so much. So at any rate, so if you want the detailed history, I strongly recommend read Mary Parrish's book. This is her photo from the back of the book, unless it's in the front. My copy doesn't actually have a binding, but she was a typing instructor who on May 31st, the beginning of these events, she was a typing instructor. By June 2nd, she was a reporter. So if you really want the details of the event from a firsthand eyewitness, please read her book. It's really interesting. Okay, I will talk forever. So the event started with a young man named Dick Rowland. He was accused of assaulting a young white woman, elevator operator. Depending on narratives you read after the event, they may have known each other, hung out together, who knows, but she never actually pressed charges against him or directly accused him. That much you can get out of the papers. But at any rate, he's accused. He's arrested later that day, and then the Tulsa Tribune publishes that article. Now, this is where I speak to the suppression of the history, because depending on your resources, if you go to, so I use newspapers.com because I wanted to read this article that I'd heard had occurred, and the copy of the paper is right there. You look at May 30th or May 31st. It might have been the morning edition back when that happened with newspapers. And the copy that was scanned into newspapers.com was, or available to them, was a copy from the Oklahoma Historical Society. And their copy has that page torn out. I mean, that article torn out. The page is there. There's just this conspicuous gap. I'm hoping by now they've used a better copy because we're kind of, up front now. But yeah, it took a long time for me to actually find a physical copy of the article, and I have not confirmed that the edges are matched to that edition, but you can work on that. So, um, all the day of the 31st, a white crowd is formed outside the jail, and some heroes of Greenwood, as I like to call them, but they were a mix of perhaps leaders of black men from Greenwood. There's a lot of argument about that in the paper the weeks following. So, but they were certainly leading in terms of we want rule of law for Roland, and that is what they said they wanted. But the police just kept, the chief was like, yeah, I got this. You guys can go, I got this. So they would leave and come back, but the crowd never diminished. And so eventually evening started to come, and these heroes show up again, and a confrontation occurs on their way out for the nth time. Some accounts say alcohol was involved. It certainly was late in the day, and some old white guy seized one of the guns that one of the black men had, and said, "Give me that gun, boy," and the rest was shooting. So the black leaders retreated to Greenwood. This is now it's evening, right? So the white mob followed at first, but as my colleague Scott Ellsworth likes to say, they were white men at night going into a black neighborhood where some of the people were military snipers from World War I. So they retreated. There were deaths. Oh, if I had time to talk about some of the deaths, but maybe you guys don't want to hear that anyway. So, because there's a conundrum in one of the death certificates, but we don't have time for that. So at any rate, they retreat. The mob reforms in the morning and goes into Greenwood en masse and systematically enters homes, loots what they wanted, piles bedding and curtains in the middle, or sets the curtains on fire where they are, and sets fire to these homes. So let's see what we got. So this is June 1st in the morning. So the flames had already started. And by scope of activity, ultimately 39 city blocks of Greenwood were destroyed. So not the complete neighborhood, but the majority of it. If you did not flee, and Mary Parrish fled around the morning of June 1st, maybe by afternoon, she was told to get her daughter out of there, and they could hear shooting, and she walked out of town. walked and got a ride out of town. But the fires were progressing through Greenwood, and if you did not flee, you were rounded up at gunpoint and taken to one of three concentration camps. And they used that term. That term predates World War II. So the three concentration camps were around town. Well, like the fairground is still there, and actually Convention Hall is still there too. It has its own story. The third one I think was the baseball field, but don't make me swear to that. So this is what things look like afterwards. This is one of several panoramic views of Greenwood after the event. The one that I took pictures of is the one that now it was stored in the Greenwood Cultural Center. I don't know who took the picture and built the panorama anymore, but the copy is now in the American Museum of African American History and Culture. So you have a chance to look at it yourself. But there's several. I didn't know there were other ones until the centennial. But if you look at this one, you can see the scope, a greater scope of the fires in the view. But the timing is probably nearer the end of, maybe the end of the first week of June. And I say that because of the tents are showing up. The Red Cross showed up pretty quick. So Morris Willows, he was the Red Cross director, and he was in the area of Oklahoma. He was in Oklahoma when he got the assignment to go back to Tulsa and say, hey, can you help out in Tulsa? So I wish I had more time to talk about Morris Willows, but he arrives pretty quickly with a mission to help the living. Meanwhile, Mary Parrish has gotten back to Tulsa, June 2nd, and she gets out of the concentration camp because she found a white sponsor. You could not leave the concentration camps without a white sponsor. I read somewhere, but I can't find the quote, so you guys will have to look it up and see if I'm just making stuff up. But I read in her book that she said, when did I need a white man? Or ever need or something. Some of those words occur in the phrase she used. And I thought, man, anyway, she was not pleased. But she found one and got out and promptly went around, started inventorying damages, and she created the first list of destroyed businesses, destroyed homes, and property losses. But there were no reparations for these losses. There is an article in that first week. You have to just keep reading the newspapers. You'll come across a letter from an insurer from another state that says, we will not hold you to the riot clause. But I think they meant for white property owners. So if you had insurance and were black, it was not honored because there's a riot clause. So even with the fine print, you can see it's quite the severe destruction, quite a bit of money. So here is where we get back to the economics of Greenwood and why, another reason why the history is suppressed or was suppressed. We're better now. So this is the Dreamland Theater before the disaster, before the rioting. This is it afterwards. And this is it, maybe by the end of the year. I don't have the exact date on when the Dreamland Theater was restored. But remember the money. So if you read the accounts of people getting out of the concentration camps, they were down to the fairground alone by the end of the month, despite that people were homeless. Your job didn't go away despite that you were homeless. So employers, the white employers, were going to the concentration camps and taking people out. I mean, there are a few funny moments when clearly the individuals were, okay, I can't tell you guys about that. We'll run out of time. So let's just talk about how many died. We don't know. Morris Willows, who was there, his mission was to the living. So he wasn't even going to speculate. He just acknowledged that bodies were moving fast. It was June 2nd, though. So how did we get to June 2nd? Well, there's shooting, there's looting, there's burning. The Tulsa National Guard, they're on site, but they're looting too. So police are looting. The city, the chief of police has long since, I think he ran off with Rowland, but there are arguments. But Rowland does survive the experience. He's not lynched, but the looting and destruction is considerable. And they did blame it. Ultimately, the grand jury blamed the events on the Greenwood residents with a side of culpability of the chief of police for not shutting down events sooner. but it was all the Greenwood residents' fault. Oh, I recommend that book too, by the way, when you're collecting references. It's really a good read if you like tables. So the Oklahoma City National Guard came in to help because the mayor said, "Hey, we need help. Can you help us?" He sent a telegram, and so they came to help. They got in at about 10 a.m. on June 1st, but they didn't stop anything right away. We don't know for sure what they were doing for about an hour, but then the homes on Detroit Avenue started burning. Those were nice homes for Black people in Greenwood. That's where well, I'll tell you that later. So at any rate, after those homes were torched, started burning, then the Oklahoma City National Guard said, "Hey, stop shooting or we'll shoot you." And they meant it too. I have a death certificate for a white man who was killed by the National Guard. So they were serious. So that stopped the fighting. That stopped it. And then they kept with the concentration camps. People started coming back in. There are a few stories of Black people found still in the surrounding fields or wilderness around Tulsa because they'd fled. Because if you were a person of note, sometimes you had to stay absent. I mean, 'cause I don't know enough of what they knew as a neighborhood, what was going on. But some of you may know how there was a physician, A.C. Jackson, Dr. Jackson. He was a notable physician, very good, but he came out of his home with his hands up and was shot by some teenager with yeah. So he was let to die because they like to shoot people in the gut, and he was let to die in one of the concentration camps. There was no effort to treat. He bled out and died. So two other doctors, one we have a headstone for in Oak Lawn, this guy Benjamin Smith, but two other doctors, they fled with their wives and were collected at the end of the week out in the countryside. But they did not want to be in Tulsa while this mob action, but they fled on foot. I wish we knew. Well, anyway. Um, okay, so the battle's over. We don't know how many were killed. So in the late 1990s, the state they commissioned a report from experts for the Tulsa Race Riot Commission. By that point, asking if the events had even occurred. So there were historians. They read the newspapers. They read Mary Parrish's book. They said, "Yeah, it occurred. We know it occurred because we said it occurred. Our own newspaper said it occurred." Our archaeologists at the time looked for sites to examine, and then Clyde Snow, my senior colleague, late Clyde Snow, he collected the certificated deaths. He collected the death certificates related to the event. They were doing death certificates by then. So we have 39 certificated deaths. Several of the individuals are buried in Greenlawn Cemetery, but we don't know where. But we knew that by the end of this report, the commission did not act further for political reasons. They were angry, so they took their toys and went home. So by 2018, Mayor G.T. Bynum said, "Hey, I wanted to resolve this issue of, are there people buried, hidden burials related to this event? Are they hidden? Because we hid the history, where are these burials?" We had 2 headstones for burials in Oak Lawn for 2 out of 20 individuals buried there, Black males related to the riot. So he formed a committee. He formed several committees. Public Oversight Committee, the Historical Context Committee, and the Physical Investigation Committee. We represent the Physical Investigation Committee for the purposes of our argument. There was the 4th committee, just for you forming your own committees. You don't talk to the mayor directly most of the time. He has staff, so recognize the 4th committee as staff. It's really, things go better. So I say we represent the Physical Investigation Committee, but Brenda is from the Public Oversight Committee. So we clearly stole her. And more on that later. But she's going to tell you about her activity with the Public Oversight Committee. So I'm going to let her give you that account now.
Good evening. My name is Brenda Nels Alford, and I am the proud granddaughter of race massacre survivors and Black Wall Street entrepreneurs James and Bassanor Nels Sr. As you've heard, the story of Greenwood was hidden for many years. And many of us in the community didn't hear about it, including myself, or at least I thought I didn't. But here is how I found out about it. In 2003, my life would change forever. When I received notification from a legal entity in Tulsa that myself and many others were being included in a lawsuit against the city of Tulsa and other entities regarding reparations for the survivors and descendants of the survivors of the 1921 race riot, as it was called at that time. I read that letter 5 times, wondering to myself, why was I receiving this? And what exactly did it mean? Therein would begin my journey to find the rest of our family story. My grandparents, James and Bassanor Nels Sr., along with my great uncle Henry Nels, were the proud owners of the Nels Brothers Shoe Shop and Record Shop, located at 121 North Greenwood Avenue and various locations throughout the community. They were also the first owners of what is now Lacey Park, wherein the Nels Dance Pavilion and skating rink was located. They also operated a limousine and taxi service. On that fateful day, my grandparents, along with their then 2-year-old daughter, family members and friends, ran for their lives from our beloved Greenwood neighborhood, only to return to find our home and our businesses looted and burned to the ground. In the days following that tragic event, one of our community members by the name of Mrs. Mary Parrish, as you've heard her name before, would basically interview several members of the communities who survived the race massacre. And one of them was my great-grandmother, Rosetta Moore. She would share the following account. On Tuesday evening, about 9:30 o'clock, I heard the report that they were going to mob a colored boy, but my family and I remained at home. Then we heard firing. I ran for my daughter. Then a man and his family came running by and he said, "The whites have burned my home and over $7,000. His wife had on about one piece. Then a crowd came and reported that they were burning and killing as they went, meaning the whites were killing and burning. I ran behind a cabinet, but they were crowding us so closely that I ran out to an outhouse where I began to pray. Then the crowd of whites ordered everybody to come out of the house, but they were slow about coming out, so the ruffians shot against the house. I ran further and saw about 15 white men chasing a man who was helpless. They even fired at him, but missed. I then went upon the hill carrying a small bundle of clothes and bedding. I was lost from my daughter and her baby until late in the afternoon on Wednesday. I saw about 5 women faint. At the Presbyterian church, I saw about 4 little children who were lost from their mothers. Old and young were piled on the trucks. And as we were being driven through town, men could be seen clapping their hands, rejoicing at our condition. After verifying this aspect of our family history, then, verifying that it was in fact true, I was absolutely devastated. And I wanted to do whatever I could do to honor the memory and legacies of my family and community members. Growing up in the Greenwood community was one of the happiest times of my life. Our family and our community members, your neighbors were more like your family. They weren't even blood related. It was uncle this, auntie that. They were so happy to give you that penny or that nickel so you could run around to the drugstore and buy some candy or a cookie. Yes, I'm that old. But anyway, but it was just absolutely wonderful. And it just broke my heart to know that something like that had happened to my family and community members that I loved so much. If it was possible to love and respect a family and a community any more than I already did, it was through the moon. And I wanted to do, as I said, whatever I could do to honor their memories. Some years later, that opportunity would come about. Mayor G.T. Bynum would make the decision to look for victims of the Tulsa Race Massacre with the mass graves investigation. And I saw that as an opportunity to, volunteer and give back to the community, to bring back some justice and healing to the community. And therefore, I joined the community and the committee, and I was asked in 2019 to be the Public Oversight Committee Chair, the second one. And I was just so honored to do so. And I'm shown here, I'm going to try to get to the slide here, shown here accepting that chairmanship. And this next picture is me going out to the Greenlawn Cemetery sites after receiving that chairmanship and just doing, a little walk around and just, wanting to pray a little and ask, for God's guidance, for me to help bring that justice and healing to our community and my family members. I also would have the opportunity to work alongside our wonderful team members. I wanted to go out and just kind of look around and see how they did the work. And as I did, I noticed, oh my gosh, there's so much more to this. Watching them doing that hard work each and every day in the heat and in the cold, depending on when we went out there to do the work. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to help out. I come from that generation where our families taught us, you don't just talk the talk, you walk the walk. And I was so honored to do so. So I'm shown here, and I'm just so happy that the city of Tulsa and our wonderful team members, they put up with me. They allowed me to come out there and, help out wherever I could. And, gradually over the years, I got to do, different things. I got to operate, some of the equipment. I'm shown here operating what I thought at first was a lawnmower. Okay, Brenda, it's not a lawnmower. A scanner. And if you can kind of see the look on my face, as I'm operating the scanner, Scott is saying, okay, and this is, I'm looking down there and I'm like, whoops, and he's telling me everything I'm seeing below the ground. And I'm like, OMG. I did not realize that that was even the thing. Okay, I was new to this. Okay, all right. So anyway, also to have the opportunity to just show respect to the skeletal remains that we would, exhume. And just to have community involvement and our wonderful team members to, just to pay the respects that they were due, as we went along these processes. So I'm shown here doing it. And then I'm here, sitting down in one of the holes because, as I said, I learned so much. I mean, as they dig down deeper and deeper, the dirt tells a story. Okay, I didn't know that. The different colorations of the dirt, the mud, okay, this is what it tells us, Brenda. And I'm like, OMG, I had no idea. But it was just awesome to learn. And as I went on, their collaborating with our team members was absolutely wonderful. And the thing is, I knew nothing about these processes. And there were just so many questions going on. Why are we this? Why can't you just go out there and find what you're looking for? Why is it taking so long? That answered the questions for me, okay? I mean, the hard decisions that had to be made along the way. And along with the hard work, oh my gosh, the collaboration of each and everybody, just meant so very much to these processes. We'll go again. And okay, I did a little digging too, okay? But it was just a matter of, okay, if they're down there doing that hard work to find our history, I can help out too. So I did a little digging as well, guilty. Also, working along with some of our other team members, besides Phoebe and Ms. Carrie and Mr. Alex, and Mr. Ryan, they let me, hold some of the equipment. So, as they basically, took pictures of, the work that we were doing. And I mean, it's all a part of our history. And as I said, I'm so honored to be able to do so. Also, the collaboration that we had with volunteers within the community, also students who came on site to volunteer with us and, have this to be a part of their learning experience. Was a historical process that they will take with them for the rest of their lives. Okay, I had to do scatter. I had to run the lawnmower again. Oh yeah, let's scatter. And here we are again, as we found another victim, a gunshot victim, as they were being carried to the lab. I, graduated from working out in the field to going into the lab and helping to prep the skeletal remains to be sent to our DNA analyst. And that in itself was a different process. I had no idea, it's hard work, but it's work that is well worth it. I'm going to read this because I want to make sure I get this part right. Having the opportunity to be a part of the mass graves investigation has given me the opportunity to work alongside and to support the city, and our wonderful team members have been amazing. I will always be grateful for their hard work and due diligence in these efforts. In spite of the challenges along the way, they persevered to bring us to this historic point in time of identifying the first victim rather, of the Tulsa Race Massacre, and Mr. C.L. Daniel, and giving his family the opportunity to memorialize him in the way that they see fit, and for him to obtain the military honors that were due him after over so many, many years. I'm also going to share a part of a letter that our DNA team came across, which basically brought them to the identification of Mr. C.L. Daniel. This is from the Veterans Administration, from 1936. A Negro woman, Amanda M. Daniels, has applied to me for help in securing any benefits that may be due her or which she may secure under present regulations. She is in destitute circumstances. She had a son, C.L. Daniel, who served in the Army during the late war. She has no discharge papers and is going to have difficulty in establishing his death. C.L. was killed in a race riot in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921, according to the best information she has furnished me. Oh my gosh. When our DNA team found this information, oh my gosh, it was just amazing. And when I heard it, I screamed. I was like, OMG. So like I said, it's absolutely amazing to have this opportunity to allow his family to memorialize him in the way that they see fit and for him to receive the honors that were way past due. And we hope to give other families this same opportunity. We also, have left the situations at Greenlawn Cemetery to where there's a possibility of finding additional victims as well. And we hope to identify them, as I said, to give their families this same opportunity. Here is part of the C.L. Daniel family during our ceremony. And this is absolutely amazing, as I said. And they are such a wonderful, loving family. Oh my gosh, I couldn't help, I'm a hugger. So I had to, to give them a big hug because I'm just so, so happy for them. Even though this is bittersweet, it is part of their history. And I'm so glad that we were able to share that with them. We will also we would memorialize the processes that we have been going through with the mass graves investigations recently, and also memorialize Mr. C.L. Daniel. And I'd like to just give you an overview of what is on that memorial that is where I am standing there. On May 31st, 1921, a white mob seized upon Tulsa's Black community in a fit of rage and murderous violence spanning 2 days. When the dust settled, the Greenwood district, fondly known as Black Wall Street, lay in total ruin. More than 1,000 homes and businesses destroyed, scores of lives lost, and the hopes and dreams of thousands temporarily dashed. Even as the ashes still smoldered, Black Tulsans began rebuilding. The indomitable human spirit prevailed, and Black Wall Street prospered for decades. Only it's prospered for decades, only there to be slowed by progress by integration and urban renewal, or removal as it was called. This work began in the 1960s. Both factors contributed to a precipitous economic downturn in 1990s. Representative Don Ross sponsored legislation creating the Oklahoma Commission to study the Tulsa Race Riot of 1921. The Commission's 2001 final report detailed the discovery of 18 death certificates dated June 1st, 1921, thought to be tied to persons killed in the massacre and secretly buried at Greenlawn Cemetery near downtown. The Commission began an archaeological exploration at Greenlawn Cemetery, but stopped short of completion. Tulsa Mayor G.T. Bynum vowed to continue the unfinished work of the Commission in 2018. He commenced the first city-funded research for persons thought to be massacre victims buried in Greenlawn Cemetery. Special thanks to the technical experts and massacre descendants who led the work and helped ensure the sacred character of the search with respect to any remains. Mayor Bynum vowed to establish identities through DNA testing and reunite families and facilitate a proper reinterment. Upon excavation and exhumation, sets of remains have been identified as possible belonging to massacre victims, with final determinations to be pending or are pending. May the victims of the 1921 Race Massacre find rest. May we remember and honor this place, Greenlawn Cemetery, as hallowed ground. May we continue to heal from the historical racial trauma of our shared past that this site invokes. Again, it has been my humbled honor to be a part of this work and to be a part of this team to do this historical work. Because my reality, every day of my life, is if my grandparents had not survived the Tulsa Race Massacre, I would not be standing here speaking with you today. And I'm grateful. Thank you so very, very much.
Thanks, Miss Brenda. It's always hard to follow, Miss Brenda. Good evening. Thank you all for being here tonight and for having us. We've been treated so wonderfully, and you guys have been just such wonderful hosts. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Alex, for organizing all of this. I do want to take a moment because I think earlier he was very nice to recognize the other members of the Stantec team who are in the audience tonight, but it happened before some of our folks came and I saw them come in. And I think if anybody else is here who came in kind of late, anybody who's been working on the team who wants to stand up, I saw Katie who didn't stand up. And she's like getting really mortified over here. Anybody, any of the team members who have been working, please stand up because we do really want to acknowledge your work and participation in this effort. We also have Brett back there, who's our wonderful backhoe operator. Thank you so much for being there. Oh, he even dressed up. All right. So good evening. I am Carrie Stackelbeck, the state archaeologist of Oklahoma, and the lead archaeologist on our investigation. As the lead archaeologist, my principal job has been to craft the strategy to employ archaeological methods in our efforts to first test the various leads regarding where the massacre victims are purportedly buried, and then second, to document and exhume any remains that are found in those locations that may fit our search criteria. Based on limited available records and oral historic accounts, historians from the State Commission that Dr. Stubblefield referenced previously, some 20 years ago, and then more recently, determined that there were 4 locations in Tulsa where credible leads warranted further investigation. As you might imagine, the city has changed substantially in the 100+ years since the massacre. Many of those Changes are not documented and others are, but not necessarily in the specific locations where we are working. And I think the cemetery project that's going on right now that Stantec is working on highlights what can happen when you're looking at a cemetery in an urban setting and where you have a lot of changes and development over time and how some of these places can get lost. And this is, in our case, it's a pretty extreme example because there was some intentionality of not wanting these people to be found again as well. So archaeology is actually very well suited to being able to try and recover data from below the ground surface, regardless of what the historic records say or omit about a given area on the landscape. But before we jump to large-scale excavations, we must first assess a given location to determine if a grave or graves are even present. Each of our locations of interest has its own specific characteristics and challenges, which requires tailored application of initial testing methods, including geophysical survey, extraction of soil samples, and evaluation of the natural and cultural stratigraphy. Among the 4 locations where these initial steps have been deployed, Greenlawn Cemetery is the one where, thus far anyway, additional expanded excavations were warranted. Now, all of these locations have their own special challenges and needs, right? But Section 20 in Greenlawn Cemetery is special and particularly challenging. Developed during the Jim Crow era, Section 20 is the African American Potter's Field, where Black people were buried before, during, and after the 1921 massacre. The landform on which the cemetery is located was once bordered by streams to the south and west, leaving the southwest corner in a naturally swampy state. Through artificial efforts, the landscape was modified sometime prior to 1917, adding substantial fill, which allowed this area to be usable for additional burials as the new Potter's Field. We estimate that around 1,000 individuals are buried in Section 20, yet only 4 names are listed in the city's ledger, and less than 100 headstones were visible on the surface at the time of our reopened investigation. And this is substantially different than the rest of the cemetery. Even the White Potter's Field has many more names listed in the city's ledger and many more headstones marking their locations, let alone the rest of the cemetery. So it's basically to say there is a stark difference in terms of the kind of recordation that is available for the African American portion of the cemetery. Archaeology was thus necessary to help fill in the gaps where historic records were lacking or absent in order to be able to locate victims that were purportedly buried there, and then also to be able to distinguish their graves from those of non-victims. Since 2021, the Oklahoma Archaeological Survey and Stantec have conducted 5 mobilizations to perform large block excavations. Using a combination of heavy machinery and hand excavation techniques, we have recorded and documented 193 graves to date. Many are folks who were buried respectfully and are not associated with the massacre, including Miss Brenda's grandmother, who is amongst those individuals somewhere out there. Some, however, maintain characteristics that are expected for the subset of massacre victims who are reportedly buried in Greenlawn Cemetery. Archaeologists are no strangers to excavating human remains. In this instance, however, we adjusted our techniques of documentation, stabilization, and exhumation to maximize the recovery of forensic data by Dr. Stubblefield and her team. Upon exhumation, the individuals are respectfully transported to the on-site forensic laboratory, often escorted by community members and clergy, and sometimes by the very crew members who so meticulously and carefully excavated their remains. Upon completion of all phases of the archaeological and forensic analyses, the remains are returned to their original graves, pending DNA and genetic genealogical work, and the potential for their descendants to determine their final resting place. The archaeological work does not end at recovery and reburial. We have a team of highly trained researchers who conduct a variety of specialized analyses to understand as much as can be gleaned from the caskets, artifacts in and around the grave, personal effects, and the associated context. The results of all of these efforts and those of the forensic team are then captured in detailed technical reports that also include our team's recommendations for any next steps that may be warranted. One particular case we highlight here is that of Burial 42. Among other details, Dr. Stubblefield's forensic work tells us that the gentleman in Burial 42 was a trauma victim who suffered a gunshot wound to the head. The archaeological excavation and specialized analyses tell us that he had only one foot, his left foot, at the time of burial, which still had the shoe on. And one might speculate, did he buy his shoes from the Nails Brothers shoe shop on Greenwood Avenue? He was also wearing clothes, likely a pair of overalls. The keys in his pocket were likely from a business location with a lockbox and with a security gate outside the front door. A swing-style security gate, specifically. The bullet that took his life was heavily deformed, but our ballistics expert suggests it was consistent with a .38 caliber bullet. His body was buried in the bloat phase of decomposition, which is likely why he was interred in a wooden crate that was repurposed as a makeshift casket. His identity has not yet been recovered by our DNA team, but he certainly fits the profile of a massacre victim. We have recovered other gunshot victims besides Burial 42. Their graves and that of C.L. Daniel and other potential massacre victims lie next to and among the marked and unmarked graves of non-victims. As Mayor Bynum often said, it's like looking for a needle in a needle stack. As you've hopefully gathered by now, we have assembled an incredibly skilled and talented interdisciplinary team of experts who are firmly committed to our two goals: testing the locations of possible mass graves, and second, finding the massacre victims whose remains have been hidden for over a century. We are also committed to practicing transparency, providing real-time updates to the best of our ability, and affording special access to the worksite for descendants and other community members. The city maintains a website dedicated to this investigation with archived meetings, presentations, and reports since the reopened investigation began, as well as a Facebook page with press conferences and video updates from the field. And I encourage any of you here to check it out if you are at all interested, particularly in the process and the history of how we even came to be at this particular point. And we certainly don't shy away from this transparency. In fact, we welcome it. But it is a different way of working. As archaeologists and forensic anthropologists, which we are far more accustomed to doing our work in relative obscurity. We conduct our field work, do our analyses, put all of our results, and render them in technical reports that few people will ever read. If we're honest about it, honestly. We might wish it were otherwise, but rarely do we have folks interested in how we do our work, let alone being interested enough to watch for hours sometimes from the fence that surrounds the cemetery. This public engagement also means that communication goes both ways, and folks are rarely shy about telling us their opinions, especially if they don't like what we are doing or how and where we are doing it. This leaves us and our team members, including our community partners, vulnerable both professionally and personally. At this time, we would like to actually ask to take a moment to pause as we acknowledge the passing of descendant and former chair of the Public Oversight Committee, Kevin Ross, who died in May 2023. We miss him a lot. His presence, I feel it here tonight, though. Kevin worked to document, preserve, and investigate the massacre most of his adult life. He was a dear friend and colleague with a fabulous sense of humor. You see him pictured in the image in the lower right of the screen. lower left of the screen. Phoebe and I stand over, and he's speaking at one of our many press conferences in that image. Phoebe and I stand over his right shoulder. As he finished speaking, he introduced Ryan Peterson, who some of you may recognize as the lead archaeologist from Stantec, who is also working on the big cemetery project here in town, and is in the audience with us here tonight. After Ryan finished, he introduced me to speak next, handing the mic to Dr. Carrie Stubblefield. Immediately realizing his gaffe as he stepped back, Kevin leaned over and casually consoled him. It's all right, man. They all look alike to me, too. Our big, incredible team remains steadfast and committed, continuing the hard work as Kevin and other community partners and descendants like Brenda and many others would have us do. I now yield the mic to Dr. Phoebe Stackstead.
Good evening once again. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our forensic findings, but I'd like to start with how we got there, or how we get there. We're still in progress, but so my involvement with the Race Riot Commission back in the 90s was because my parents grew up in Tulsa. They were born and raised in Tulsa, and a colleague of mine, Leslie Rankinhill, she was on the Race Riot Commission already, and she said, "Don't you have relatives in Tulsa?" And she's an anthropologist. We're the same kind of anthropologist with a slightly, but we both study human skeletal remains. And while I was still a grad student, she said, "Hey, do you want to be involved in this?" So I said, "Sure, Tulsa." And I was invited on. Scott Ellsworth, our historian, he was the lead then. He did his dissertation research on the Tulsa Race Massacre, and he invited me on formally. And then I called home and I said, "Hey, Mommy, did you know there was a race riot in Tulsa in 1921? And she said, "Yes, your Aunt Anna lost her house." And I said, "Who's Aunt Anna?" Because it was 98. You could do genealogy then, but I didn't have the concept well developed. But I knew I did not have an Aunt Anna. And so, but she's my great Aunt Anna, it turns out. Those two very well-dressed people is Anna and Ellis Walker Woods. Ellis Walker Woods was the principal of Booker T. Washington High School, a version of which, because it was a different thing when you went there, right? Yeah, I mean, the building was there, but not the, yeah. Yeah. So, because the Booker T. Washington High School was not destroyed in the race riot. So, which was fortunate because the Black Hospital, Frizzell, was destroyed. And so they did triage and maybe not past first aid, because I know they were doing surgeries in the basement of Morningside Hospital. They allowed Black people to come into there for surgery, the basement area. And then they reopened the Cinnabar Hospital, which had been which communicable disease was it? So not tuberculosis, syphilis, blood disease, they called it. They had a nice euphemism. You read the ads. There are ads for it, but it closes in about 1919. Building was still there, so they reopened it for Black surgical care after the riot. But at any rate, so back to the Woods. They had a house on Detroit, and it was destroyed. So she lost her house. I did not know. So there we go. Back to the team. I like to talk about our team because I just, in a similar way, that Brenda mentions, how are we here? I am very grateful for our team. It's because we're really a great team. I'm very thankful because I know I'm faculty at the University of Florida, and you can't get a department of anthropologists together without discovering that somebody's got a mental illness, and so you laugh, but after all, you don't know if it's not me. So at any rate, so being on a team of colleagues that cooperate so well is such a blessing. I just say when you have it, run with it. But at any rate, by I show 2022, we had Carrie and I, and one of the POC members, Michael Reed, I don't have a picture of him, but he's one of the senior POC members, and then the deputy mayor at the time, we interviewed the archaeologist that ended up, we hired Cardno. Ryan was with Cardno then. Cardno got bought by Stantec, but same players, different company, but they're just great. So after that, we tried again and interviewed geneticists and ended up with Intermountain Forensics as our genetics partners because, for one thing, they were their prime star is that they were aware that we needed to have social interaction with the Greenwood community in order to get their genealogical stories and DNA, and we weren't prepared for that. I mean, we didn't have that. What are we going to do? That's scientists of other kind. So we acquired Intermountain Forensics, and I had to take the slide out, but um, I just changed it for this one because in theory I'm supposed to finish tonight. But the because of Intermountain Forensics, we found the Daniel family. So it took several years. This is my sidebar where I say things like, if you're of African descent and you're interested in genealogy, if you can stand to, do your genetic genealogy. We found in the Tulsa community, there's a lot of fear that the DNA will be used in some way to harm directly or then harm indirectly. And Intermountain has been very good at showing, here are the risks. They have a fantastic chart on the 1921 Graves website that shows here are all the risks at different levels for doing your own genetic genealogy. And I will say firsthand, as someone who sold their DNA to 23andMe, that if you're considering your genealogy, please use Ancestry. I still don't have cousins, while my identical twin who used Ancestry has all our cousins. So the DNA companies have different missions, but the risk isn't that we will do something to you. We, the scientific community, we, the forensic community, that's not the risk. The first risk is you will learn something you did not want to know about your identity. So that I do caution you. I didn't, but just in case, because that's your real risk. But I'd like to use this slide too, because I don't have other images, it turns out. But Allison Wild is here. She's our lead genealogist. She's with Andrea McCarthy, who's one of our Tulsa local genealogists. And here's Janelle Daniels, she's been our liaison to families that were trying to say, hey, can you risk adding your genetic profile to the clearinghouse because it's a separate process from getting the profile. Because we're finding that a lot of African Americans have done a genetic profile, they just haven't contributed it to the clearinghouse. So Janelle has worked closely with the Daniel family here. Andrew, his sister, who's man, I'll get her name after this talk. Ida, and then you can't see Ida, and then Stacy, who's named after her grandfather. Yeah, named after her grandfather. They are the grand nibblings of C.L. Daniel. Because he did not have. Well, he might have had offspring actually, but it did not proceed. So we're at the memorial for Private Daniel there. So I'd like to highlight that we are all great team members together, and the Daniel family is an excellent fit. They really are a great family, and yeah, we could not have been blessed to work with a better descendant family. Getting the news that your great uncle, that you knew you had several, but you didn't know where they all ended up, died young in Tulsa. So I have a team of other osteologists and forensic anthropologists that I work with in the lab. Forensic anthropology is the practice of examining human skeletal remains for the purpose of sometimes identification, because your skeleton is interested in who you are. Sometimes it's because of your health or appliances you may have installed. But the way you look at your face and think you have resemblance to your cousins or aunts and uncles, I mean, you can say siblings, but we're really we're broader. Your skull is interested in that too. So the resemblance goes deeper than the tissue, the soft tissue, on the outside. So we use your skull to estimate what population you're from, ancestry, race, because in the U.S. you can use both terms. Just keep in mind race is whatever everyone's saying at the same time. You don't have to agree, and you're both right. So this is my most of my team. You see Kevin's there because he would be in the lab too. We literally took the POC chairs and incorporated them at every generation into our committee. And so, but it's an excellent fit. My colleagues, several from the Office of the Medical Examiner for the state of Oklahoma, these two, and my colleague Ariane Mays, who's an osteologist in San Diego State. And this is Scott Ellsworth and his son here. He's our historian, the one I told you about, who did his dissertation and led a lot of the early research into what can we, well, he and Bob Warner, or Dick Warner, led the research into what sites would be the best sites. And you can read, I recommend reading the Race Riot Commission report. There's a copy on the 1921 Graves website. But if you want to read Death in the Promised Land, Scott Ellsworth's book, don't do it. Read the report. He does a much more thorough job of reporting the events of the race riot in the commission report. So, save your eyeballs. So when you saw how we were on site and remains were escorted to the on-site laboratory. So when the remains come into the lab, we would X-ray them. And they're on soil on top of cookie trays, but the X-ray machine and those digital plates, they are robust to almost everything you could lay them on before X-raying. So we would find artifacts in the lab, that personal effects and artifacts that later we refer to our archaeology colleagues. I pretend my colleagues are the CSI to my forensic anthropology because I deal with bones, not so much artifacts. Our most common personal effect is our safety pins, because they had burial shrouds. So we'll get safety pins in the neck area and the hip area. So we keep our eyes peeled for 2 safety pins. They do preserve well, but not as common. We see personal effects like, oh darn, here, let me go back here. Snaps, buttons. Buttons are maybe better represented. It depends, because there's a sex and age distribution issue when you see the clothing snaps, and we stopped taking, well, I'll show you in a second. So, and then we find bullets. Not as many. The number of individuals we've examined has to do with our hunt image, because we were hunting for certain caskets. So the newspaper accounts from June 2nd, 1921, indicate that the several named victims and some unidentified were buried in Greenlawn Cemetery in plain caskets. So these are caskets that are just nails and wood. So we didn't know what was underneath Greenlawn when we first started. And so we've, to date, well, I won't get to date to the next slide, but when we recover individuals with gunshot wounds, we think maybe they're candidates, but we can't technically know because people were getting shot regardless, outside of the event, right? And there's no documentation for how Section 20 was used. We can't tell. So this is a projectile from burial 27. It was the first gunshot wound victim we recovered. It's slightly deformed because it struck the back of his head internally. But this is the bullet. Oh, darn it, I keep pressing that button. From burial 42, also a cranial gunshot wound, much more deformed, many more fragments. And because thanks to X-ray, we can collect most of the fragments. And I can't show you some of the information we have on the gunshot wounds victims hasn't been released yet to the city, so I can only tell you about it, but I can't show you the artillery until we do this again some other day, I suppose. So here are a breakdown of how many people we've examined in the lab. We've had 47 total. There's an issue, but we're going to say 47. You see, in our first year, we were collecting women, and then after that, we tried hard not to collect women. Because we didn't know what was going on with Greenlawn, so we collected women. We collected everybody at first, and then we finally realized what a plain casket looked like, and then we got really good at recognizing plain caskets by that last year. I won't tell you how it frightens me how good that they are. They really are. Sometimes they look at a burial profile, just a shaft. They haven't found the burial. They just see the shaft and go, yeah, I think that's going to be one. And then it is. They're skilled. So this year, one, burial 27. This year, one, burial 42. This year, 0 gunshot wound victims. And this year, we recovered 4. And we recovered 4 from an area we call the original 18 area, and that's for the 18 other male victims because 2 were, yeah, it's down. 2 were had markers in the original 18 area, so the rest of the area was labeled for the 18 unidentified, unmarked burials. So this is just the squint at diagram for how our burials of interest are distributed. We've examined or identified over 190 burials in our excavations, but only have extracted the 47 because plain caskets, they're not rare, but they're not common. And when they do occur, they're almost always male. We used to say we had 2 females, but one of them turned out to be he was a man. So now we're down to 1 plain casketed woman. I don't know what you had to do as a woman to get a plain casket, just FYI. But so I'm going to point out the ones that are still of interest to us because of possible ballistic evidence or actual ballistic evidence. But know that if you're shot, if the bullet does not hit bone, and if it exits your body, we won't know. You could still be a victim of the race riot. We won't know. And that was the case for C.L. Daniel. He had no evidence of ballistic trauma. Burial 101 is of interest because he has some metal particles associated with his anatomy, just an arm, but no ballistic evidence. Burial 157, we did recover a bullet. It was an atypical bullet. For you enthusiasts out there, it was a bullet made out of pewter. Yeah, we almost threw it away because we didn't recognize it. We don't actually throw stuff away, but we're like, that's not anything. We thought it was a strange button. Here's burial 27. There's Private Daniel, and you see they're in this general zone. And I don't have time to talk about our issues. Here's burial 42. He's the one that was in the bloat phase of decomposition, and one of the rare ones to have personal effects. And then our most recent season, 2024, we recovered 135, 194, and 195, and they have multiple forms of gunshot wounds. 135 and 195 were shot in the legs with shotguns scatter. And then they were shot by handguns in the torso, possibly in the head for 195, but he was severely burned, so we didn't get much of his head. So, but he has, okay, I'm not going to tell you guys that actually. Because sometimes, you see, because one of the things I say do when you're making your program, planning your team, get a social worker. Because I don't know if I say something like, hey, look at the burn pattern on the back of his head. And we go, the forensic anthropologist, we go, cool. We can see that burn damage survives 100 years of burial. That's the cool. Because we're looking for 4 burn victims. 195 is our first, oh yes, he's burn victim. We didn't know we'd be able to tell. But how will you feel about seeing that? I don't know. I mean, how am I supposed to know? But meanwhile, I'll just go on in life and terrorize you and keep talking. So 194 was just shot with multiple handguns, different handguns. So these are the first individuals that fit the narrative we know from the history: chased, hunted, and shot and killed men. And really the hunt, because of that shotgun blast to the legs, and to see it repeatedly. 135 had so many pellets in his, okay, I gotta stop talking. So after we do the analysis, we bundle the remains, so tight bundle, so that they can be reburied. We don't always know when we're going to do the reburial, so we're trying to give them a chance to be the individual remains, a chance to be neatly collected once again, but also to be a little more portable should it come to pass that the family will move them. And so we try and have that available. So that's what Brenda and I are doing there, bundling. And the rest is pretty self-explanatory. So one of the other activities I and my forensic anthropology colleagues have been involved in is working with the genealogists on these IDs, and a lot of it involves the death certificate data for the time period, but also we've been trying to verify that our late colleague Clyde Snow looked at enough death certificates, because we can't ask him. And so we have the ones he collected, which were for the 20 individuals buried in. Actually, he has a whole set of 39 individuals, white and black, who are associated with the event. But the question arose of how did he get access to the death certificates? Did they look through all of them, just looking for ones that were marked riot deaths, or did they just go to June and July and pull out ones they already knew about? Because some of these deaths are listed in the paper. So we took a look because we were interested in this one individual who Morris Willows said, hey, I got this young man in the hospital on December 31st. His name's Arthur Morrison, and his mother died from her injuries related to the riot. We don't have any women who died from the riot. There are women on the injured list in the newspaper. They were in the hospital. Their wounds were recorded as will recover, but we don't have any women who died in the riot. That's why we think there's got to be another round of burials that date from the Oklahoma City martial law period, because it's as if no one else died after June 1st. I mean, unless you've been shot by June 1st, and then you could die in the hospital months later, like Commodore Knox. He died months later, August, because he had a spinal injury from being shot. So we have his death certificate, but no women. Well, here is, if you can read it. So it says Ella Morrison. Can you read her cause of death? Yeah, no, because it's doctor handwriting. And it's in cursive. I really fear for my future because I have a lot of death certificates and having to read them. I can read cursive. So it says miscarriage with septicemia. Yeah. And she died in Muskogee County because they're around the mid-June, I found a newspaper article, by June 12th, the not the Red Cross, but that other agency, Salvation Army, had a news. They were interviewed, and they said, "Hey, we're sending people out of Tulsa to recover because we just don't have any space anymore." So I think that's how Ella Morrison ended up in Muskogee, but also because Biona Moore is her sister, so she had family. She just didn't recover. So in summary, here is our list of those we know from the documentation were killed in association with the riot, with updates from the time that Clyde Snow originally recovered them. You know, most of these names are collected just from the newspaper, except for the unidentified ones. So we gave C.L. Daniel a certificate because we had someone who was listed as unknown cause of death, and he didn't show any signs of trauma, so we've assigned him that, and we're working with the medical examiner's office to get that certification updated, because that's what you do for the state. John White, his certificate was recertified in 1925, and digging through the death certificates, I found the recertification. And I think my colleague had found it earlier too. He just didn't include it with the main stack. But the black deputy sheriff that worked in Greenwood recertified him based on the wife's testimony in 1925 and lists him as dead June 1st, 1921. And then we've added Ella Morrison. I don't know if we'll find the other women. I mean, yeah, I don't know if we'll find them. It's going to be hard. Her death certificate doesn't have any association with the riot. And she dies in July, so I don't know what'll happen. Just we'll keep trying though. So I better get us some Q&A time. But this is our team, and I'm just very grateful that on top of us being together, that Mayor Bynum, by being brave enough to pursue this, has given the Greenwood community something back, but has also given us something, because we have colleagues here that they are our friends. We'll love them forever. So I'm thankful.
Right. Thank you to each of you for sharing with us today. I've been informed that we actually don't have time with the audiovisual to do a Q&A, but we can be in the space. Is that right? In the lobby? All right. So what I'm going to do is close here, but then I'm going to invite everybody to come out there, including you three, if you're willing to do this. And if you have questions up close and personal, ask them questions today. I think this is a unique opportunity, so we'll be moving out there. But I do want to say thank you to all of you for coming here. Thank you to Crown Hill Foundation and Indiana Landmarks for making this available. So, appreciate it.